And so with that, everyone talks about how we need a diverse portfolio of all different energy sources. And EGA's recent announcement about LNG, I know that you were originally a proponent for it. So where do you think LNG stands now with our portfolio?
Well, I think the governor has valid concerns, and a lot of people have expressed them, and it's essentially that, how much capital expenditure might be required in order for how much savings. And obviously, if it's an enormous capital expenditure for relatively small savings, then it ought to cause us to reconsider. Where we may differ is that I think we ought to see what the electric utility and the gas utility propose to us and see how those numbers work out. The PUC, I think, in the next 6 or so weeks is going to be able to look at those questions and address them. But certainly, that's one of the upside to LNG is potential savings. The downside to LNG is potential capital expenditure and the challenge of actually executing. But I think the PUC is in the best possible position to make the choice for the fossil side of our energy mix.
So with that, kind of going along with the governor's announcements recently, one of our most interesting stories has to do with Hawaii is the NextEra possible acquisition of HEI. Mm-hmm. With his opposition, I guess what's your stance?
Well, I think that, first of all, we ought to focus on two things and two things only. First is driving down cost, and when we think about driving down cost, we ought to drive down cost on the fossil generation side and on the renewable energy side, because people really need some relief. And the second is to increase the percentage of penetration of clean energy in our portfolio, because I'm totally committed to our clean energy goals. Everything else is a distraction, and that's how the PUC ought to evaluate this. Now, I feel strongly that there's a law here that prescribes how we contend with an issue like an acquisition of our electric utility, and it is that the PUC puts together a hearing process, and this is going to be unprecedented. I think we have 28 individual interveners. It's going to be at the Blaisdell Center. I mean, I don't think anybody could have imagined that you'd have a PUC hearing at Blaisdell, but that just shows how much passion there is on this issue. And so I don't want to prejudge what the public testimony will bear out. I don't want to prejudge what all the docket and investigatory process will show us, except to say that I really think the PUC has to be laser focused on reducing costs and increasing the penetration of renewable energy. One concern that I have is that whether we end up with NextEra HECO or just HECO at some point, in the middle of next year, we can't afford to lose momentum. We can't afford to lose time in terms of our current challenges. So you have open dockets, you have all kinds of fuel choices that have to be made, you have grid improvements, you have the need to integrate more intermittent renewable energy into the grid, and so we're not going to make progress if all we do is deal with the question of the configuration of our utility. There's also the question of how the utility is contending with our current problems, and we simply can't afford to wait 10 months before we get started on any of that.
So and along with that, as you're saying, they need to be laser focused. There is a lot of concern about the company in and of itself. Like, do you think that's unwarranted, or do you think it's a distraction? Yeah.
Look, I think there are advantages and disadvantages. The advantages that NextEra potentially could bring to the table are a big balance sheet and the ability to finance projects that may not have penciled out for a smaller utility with more challenges on the fiscal level. And they are certainly competent. The question is, how do they fit into our public policy, and how do they fit into our community? Do they get what we're trying to do on the cost side? Do they get what we're trying to do on the clean energy goal side? And I think that the burden of proof as a matter of law is on them. They're the ones that want to acquire the Hawaiian Electric Company, and the way that they meet their burden is in this quasi-judicial public hearing. So I think that's the balancing act here. I think a lot of people are attracted to the idea that somebody with real experience running a giant utility and with a big balance sheet, may provide some opportunities. But I think the anxiety that we all have is that it's not at all clear yet whether these folks get us.
Is it